Don't go just yet. It's time for Buckeye Grove Instant Access. Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcasts Network, wrapping up the latest Buckeyes basketball news.
I'll make it.
Post-game talk, action from around the conference, immediate analysis, and much, much more, all on the fast break. Don't get whistled for a double dribble. Here's your host, Kevin Noon.
Hey, welcome to the BIA Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Noon. That is the Buckeye Grove Instant Access Podcast, and it's been a little bit since we've done one of these. I've been bad about it, but we're sitting here leading up into the weekend of the Final Four. Been an interesting season for the Ohio State Buckeyes in terms of basketball. We got some roster management stuff to talk about, maybe just a big view of the tournament, maybe a little recruiting as well. I want to welcome in Jake Spegal, our fantastic basketball recruiting analyst, and I'm going to have him kind of do a little double duty today, talking about not only the recruiting side of things, but just basketball in general. First and foremost, welcome to the show, Jake.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Kevin. I'm glad to be back on. I really enjoyed it the first time that I came on the podcast. So excited to talk about some recruiting, some roster makeup, and then even a little bit about the team this season and, the tournament. And, this has been such a crazy year all around for everything, and basketball season's been no different. So I think we got a lot to talk about.
Exactly, and we're going to kind of go in reverse order. We're going to talk about just the tournament in general. Obviously, Ohio State did not have the type of run that everybody was hoping for. We will talk about Ohio State specifically in a couple of minutes, but just the tournament in general. You put these teams in a bubble. Everything is in Indiana. Most of it's in Indianapolis. I mean, obviously they did play at Assembly Hall on the IU campus and Mackey Arena over in West Lafayette, and then around the greater Indianapolis area. Not necessarily a tournament that saw chalk for the first several rounds. As we get ready to go into the Final Four, 3 of the 4 teams are from top 2 lines. And then, of course, you have UCLA, who had to play in the quote-unquote play-in game. Just your overall impressions of how this tournament has looked as somebody who, watches basketball with more than just a passing eye.
Yeah, so obviously March Madness is crazy every year, but I think this year with the bubble effect, and then obviously shortened regular seasons for a lot of teams, like Ivy League didn't even play all season, and then obviously it's been really weird because I think something that we saw certainly in the tournament is the Big Ten. Everybody, including myself, the whole year I thought it was the best conference in the country, but I think that's something we saw with the dynamic of this season where, when you really look at it, the Big Ten didn't have a lot of big-time non-conference wins. It was just the teams in the Big Ten who were the top teams in the country played a lot of good games. And obviously, Michigan made it to the Elite Eight, and Iowa, I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they fell in the Sweet 16. But obviously they did well. But like Ohio State, I think they had a tough draw, honestly, for playing a 15 seed. But the one thing that I think that's interesting that is Baylor and Gonzaga. Obviously, they've been the top 2 teams in the country all year, and in the tournament, especially in the Elite Eight, it kind of looked like Baylor and Gonzaga against the field. Especially Gonzaga, I personally think they're going to end up winning it, but it's kind of this. It's been weird where in a year where there's been so much madness, really the top 2 teams that everybody's been expecting to kind of run through the tournament all season have. So, obviously anything can happen in the Final Four. It'll be crazy, but that's one thing that I think's been interesting. And then my other big takeaway is that I think the Big Ten was a bit overrated this year. So, I mean, I will see. It was an odd year for everyone, but I think that was certainly the case.
I'm not one to necessarily make excuses, but for the Big Ten, they bubbled up even earlier in Indianapolis than anybody else, with the Big Ten tournament taking place there at Lucas Oil Stadium. As somebody who covered the entire tournament, it was, probably one of the best conference tournaments that I've seen, at least in terms of the Big Ten. I have covered one Big 12 many moons ago, but, for me, seeing that, I mean, do you think that maybe there could have been a certain level of fatigue of just being there? I mean, people are like, well, maybe they just didn't want to be there. Well, you're playing for a national championship. I don't buy the not wanting to be there, but you've been sequestered a week longer in terms of maybe you go from one hotel to a different hotel, so you're seeing a different lobby, maybe. I don't know. I mean, probably not even getting down to the lobby that much. And secondly, do you think maybe the way that Big Ten games are called, I mean, we talk about this year in and year out, the Big Ten teams have to be thrilled to get out of conference play, and, the tackle basketball that the Big Ten kind of has a reputation of being. Do you think that it maybe just kind of caught up with them this year, being used to playing one style of basketball and getting into the tournament and it just not adding up? Or is it just, truly that they were, they got all of their praise for just beating up on one another, because there weren't a lot of those non-conference games, even though Ohio State does boast a win over UCLA in the CBS Sports Classic?
Yeah, I definitely, that's something I actually haven't even thought about yet. I definitely think the fact that they were there for a week longer certainly could have played a factor, because obviously we saw all the NBA players in their bubble this season. Obviously it took such a mental toll on all of them. Obviously they were there a lot longer, but that just shows that the Big Ten teams, that they were there a week longer. That could certainly have a mental effect. And then that's something that I kind of think as well that ties in with the way Big Ten games are called, is how the Big Ten tournament was so competitive. Every game really was so competitive, and I think Big Ten teams might have even beat up on each other a little bit, and then certainly the style of play in the tournament, when you're not having Big Ten officials every game and you're not playing Big Ten teams every game, can certainly play a factor in that, because obviously a team like Loyola who beat Illinois, they make a lot of threes, they play more of a finesse game, and they run a lot of offense, and then if you just get some of those guys in foul trouble, which doesn't often happen for guys like Kofi Coburn and Big Ten play. Obviously, stuff like that can certainly play into it. And it's such an odd year, and the Big Ten just looks so good in the regular season, and then teams like even I personally in my bracket I picked Illinois to win it all, and then it was just such an odd year where I just really couldn't predict anything, and then when the Big Ten started, especially it started with Ohio State, really, I guess I can kind of start to talk about them, because I think they had a tough draw, but then Ohio State really I think was a team where in Big Ten play they know how to defend those teams, and they play really good defense, and that allows them to kind of just use their balanced scoring attack and make timely shots to beat teams. Once you get to the tournament, Ohio State I don't really think had a guy who you can give the ball and say, we need you to score. Obviously, Dwayne Washington was that guy, but I think you need someone a little better. Like obviously playing Oral Roberts, Max Smith, he dominated the ball for them and made a lot of big shots. And then I think that's something else that definitely played into the game for them, is just the way that they had such a balanced scoring dynamic this season that once they got into the tournament and they really struggled to defend Oral Roberts, especially on the perimeter. That was something where they couldn't really score enough points to keep up with them.
You're listening to the BIA Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. I'm joined by Jake Spegal, our great basketball recruiting analyst here on Buckeye Grove. We are talking basketball this show, 100% basketball. Talking about Ohio State, and we'll get to the overview of the season maybe in general, but, let's talk about that Oral Roberts game for a second. I know a lot of Ohio State fans want to kind of put that out of their mind. It's over. It's done with. I mean, really, it was a two-man show for Oral Roberts in that game with Max Smith and with Kevin O'Banner. And each of them, they put up the vast majority of those points. Ohio State had every opportunity to win that game. It came down to having, a look at the end of regulation and so on and so forth. And, it just wasn't there. But, it just, you sit there and you work and you claw and you get that, you get that 2 seed, the highest seed Ohio State has had under Chris Holtmann as head coach of the Buckeyes. And you just never know what you're going to get with that 15, because, you're getting a conference champion, and generally you're going to get those teams that can just sit there and put up points in bunches, and are probably ranked down there because they have no non-conference, or they have no real conference quadrant 1 or quadrant 2 wins because of just the prestige or whatever of what their conference is. And, you go against the nation's leading scorer in Max Asmus, and he just, he lights you up.
Yeah, that's certainly something that I think we're going to start to see more and more, especially in the tournament, is, like low major and mid major programs who win a lot of games year in and year out. I think you're going to start, beating a lot more high major programs. And that's why I honestly, something that I've talked about recently is I wouldn't mind seeing some more mid major schools who might not have won a conference championship but had a really good season, maybe make the tournament over a team who's maybe like 18 and 10 or something, then they're a Big 12 team. But because a team like Oral Roberts, I don't really think they're a 15 seed, but like you said, they don't really have any quadrant 1 or quadrant 2 wins. But that's just where they're going to be placed. And then, that's a tough draw for Ohio State. As much as, you look at it on a bracket and you say, okay, 2 versus 15, they're going to win. But, really once you put the ball down, everyone ties their shoes the same way. And especially these guys are all college basketball players. Oral Roberts has won a conference championship. They've won a lot of games. And then that's something that I think a lot with a lot of these smaller schools. Something kind of added into that is, those guys win a lot of games. That usually those are teams that have a lot of experience and they have a lot of good chemistry, and they know how to win close games. And when you let those teams hang around, obviously like we saw Ohio State did, they had chances late to win the game. But when you let teams like that hang around who have such a good cohesiveness and they have so much experience, anything can happen.
I'm going to ask you to do something that's really difficult as we wrap up this first segment of the show. Let's take the NCAA tournament off the table in answering this question. When you look at this Ohio State season, when you look at this 2020 / into 2021 season, what, how will you remember it? How will you compartmentalize it in terms of, do you look at it as, overall a largely successful season? Is it too hard to take, what happened at the end of the year off the table? Additionally, before Ohio State's Big Ten tournament run, you have a team that, looked like it was going to be a 1 seed who then kind of falls apart a little bit at the end before righting the ship for the, for the Big Ten tournament. How do you write the book, if you will, in terms of this season for the Buckeyes?
Honestly, myself, I would consider it a successful season because I know a lot of other people, not everyone, but at least myself, and some others that I know. I didn't expect Ohio State to be a team this season who has so many top 10 wins that they're, catapulting into the number 4 spot in the nation in the middle of the regular season. And, obviously the tournament loss, that hurts, but every year, here Holtman continues to improve and he's bringing in a lot of good recruits. And I think this was a really good year for the brand of Ohio State basketball, to the point where, obviously back in, the early 2010s, late 2000s, you're letting guys like Greg Oden and Jared Sullinger and BJ Mullins, who, top players in the nation. I think this is another good year where Ohio State was a team where I kind of said it all year. They could make the Final Four or they could lose in the second round. And obviously they've lost in the first round. But, I think it was a good season, though. Obviously, you'd want to see more in the tournament, but I think it's another step in the right direction. And with a lot of the guys Holtman continues to bring in, I really think the program's going to continue to ascend. And I just think this year was a little bit of a sneak peek. I think this was a year early. I just hope Ohio State didn't peak early, because I think in the future, I think we could see them really continue to put together consistently solid regular seasons. And then I think they're going to make some noise in the tournament eventually.
And there you have it right there. And while we certainly can't close the book on the 2020/21 season, we are going to look ahead to 21-22 and beyond on the other side of this quick break.
Egg Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com.
Welcome back to the BIA Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Noon. I'm joined by Jake Spegal, and we are talking Ohio State basketball. Some roster news to talk about now. The Buckeyes have gone out to the transfer portal and picked up a player in Penn State's Jamari Wheeler. Ohio State has lost a player to the portal with Musa Jallow looking for a new home. Let's kind of start with what the Buckeyes are getting in Penn State, or former Penn State's Jamari Wheeler, in terms of, getting a graduate transfer, a guy who has, played for years in the Big Ten, in typical fashion, probably done pretty well against Ohio State. Now he'll be suiting up for Ohio State. I could kind of go through the list of superlatives I know, but, let's go to you as somebody who watches this, as I said, a lot closer than I do in terms of a talent evaluation standpoint.
Yeah, so obviously something that we saw all season, especially in the tournament game against Oral Roberts, is that Ohio State needs to add perimeter defense, something Coach Holtman talked about all season. It's not something that he ignored. It's something he was looking to address. And obviously losing Musa Jallow, he was one of the team's better defenders. That hurts, but, bringing in a guy like Jamari Wheeler, he's been on the Big Ten's all defensive team 2 times. He's experienced. He's not a guy who's going to go out and score 20 points and win you a game, but he's a guy who can go out and lock down the opposing team's point guard and do whatever you ask of him. And I think it's a bit of an upgrade. Obviously, it's not like we're trading Jamari Wheeler for Musa, but I think Musa is a guy who obviously is more of a guy who's going to defend wings. And, you still got guys like Justice Ewing, and, obviously I think he can defend pretty well. And then if EJ Liddell somehow decides to return, I don't think that's going to happen, but, he's a guy who can defend on the wing, and then Eugene Brown, Malachi Brown. But, Jamari Wheeler is a guy who can really defend opposing point guards really well. And so he's going to bring a lot of defensive value to Ohio State. And then, he'll make shots when he's open, which is key out of role players, obviously. And so I think that's a big addition for Ohio State. It'll be interesting to see how the guard landscape looks next year with him, Soto's. You got Dwayne Washington, you have Michi Johnson. So I think it'll be an interesting backcourt dynamic, but I think Ohio State's done a good job of balancing offense and defense by bringing him in.
And you sit there and you look at the immediate for this team, and you have EJ Liddell, who's going through the NBA process, but so did Caleb Wesson a couple of years. So he'll be able to go through and we don't know necessarily what in-person stuff is going to look like per se, just because the world hasn't really opened up yet at this point. So there's some we may not know exactly how the process is, but the NBA and the NCAA worked well together in terms of allowing players to kind of go out and at least get some things that, some feedback on what they can work on to better themselves or whatnot. But, by my official count, if Kyle Young returns and Jimmy Sotos, who's going to come back, those two would get that COVID year and would be non-counters against the scholarship number. They, in essence, would have one more spot, when they bring in their recruiting class for this upcoming season and everything else. The belief is they need to go big, but, outside of Ibrahima Diallo, it's been a minute since they've gone out and gotten like a traditional center size type of guy. What do you think the move is? And if you were there tasked with making the decision, and maybe who are the names out there that you think the Buckeyes should be looking at?
Yeah, so that is right. There will be one scholarship left, and I think at this point, if they go after anyone besides a big, I think it would be a waste of a scholarship. I think you have to prioritize getting a big man. And, there's a lot of options in the transfer portal. They're still recruiting some 2021 guys, but, in the transfer portal, you got guys like from Georgetown. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but Kudus Wahab, I want to say. Ohio State recruited him in high school. He averaged 12.8 points, 8.2 rebounds last season. I'm not sure if they've been in contact with him at all, but obviously he's an option. And then I think one who would be a really logical option is Sterling Manley, who he's a transfer from North Carolina. He's in the portal. He's 6'11", 7-foot big man. And the thing is, Sterling went to Pickerington Central in high school. He was really a late bloomer. He didn't receive an offer from Ohio State, but he got offers from schools like North Carolina, West Virginia, and but he's been a guy who's dealt with a lot of injury. But obviously, at this point in his career, I think he's a little further along than Diallo, so I think he could be a little bit of a late option. And then obviously there's still guys in the 2021 cycle they're going after. The biggest name's Chet Holmgren. He's the number one player in the nation. He still hasn't made a decision, but a lot of people are thinking he's gonna go to Gonzaga. I think he'll either go there or he'll do a G League type route. And then you also got two other guys they've been going after, Efton Reed and Charles Bediako. They both play at IMG Academy in Bradenton, Florida. Efton Reed, the bright side for Ohio State there is he took an official visit to Ohio State before all the COVID shut down. He also took one to Louisville and Virginia, which is where he's originally from, is in Virginia. So it'll be interesting to see what he does. Months ago, he said he was going to announce the top schools list, but he hasn't commented on that since. That was in January. We haven't seen anything else from him. And then Bediako said he plans to wait until after the NCAA tournament to commit. But there's been a lot of traction towards him going towards Alabama. But he released the top 5, I think, in October maybe. It was Texas, Alabama, Duke, Michigan, and then, of course, Ohio State. And then one other guy who his name's Jonas Adu. He was committed to Marquette. He recently decommitted there last week. And he said he's been hearing from Ohio State. So that's definitely another option. So there's a lot of options who they could go after to fill out their one more scholarship. You'd like to see them get a guy in the recruiting cycle because they're going after pretty much top guys in the country. Those are really the only guys that are left at this point. And then it'll be interesting to see what they do there because there's plenty of options in the portal. So I think ultimately they'll be able to find something, but it'll just be interesting because there's so much going on this offseason.
And and we could get into an X's and O's talk about how this team would be different in terms of playing with a big, and I don't know. I think that's something better for a written article in terms of over at Buckeye Grove instead of here on the podcast, since at least with me, it's kind of like that scene from The Hangover where Zach Galifianakis has all the math equations floating in front of him. I definitely need a flow chart there and everything else to figure all that out. I just know that this positionless basketball is all well and good, but I think the position you do need is a big man in terms of playing in the Big Ten when you're going up against the bigs over at Purdue with Trevion Williams and Edey, and then you got Dickinson up at that school up north, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's difficult when EJ or Kyle are your biggest guys on the floor. But Ohio State's class of 2021, a couple talented players. Both listed as forwards. Kalen Etzler, a 6'8" forward out of Convoy, and then of course Malachi Branham, a 6'5" forward out of Akron. You had a chance to see Branham put up some special numbers in terms of the state tournament. What are Buckeye fans going to get to see when he gets to play his first game?
Yeah, so Malachi Branham, he's been a 4-year player at St. Vincent St. Mary in Akron, same school as LeBron James. He won 2 state championships. We won't know until next week, but I think he's going to win Mr. Basketball in Ohio. Malachi, I think, is the best recruit. It might not even be in terms of ranking, but I just personally think he's the best recruit Coach Holtman has landed since he's got to Columbus. He's a guy who can make an instant impact on both ends of the floor. He plays with a really good feel for the game. He really makes it look easy. In the state championship, he had 37 points to lead his team to a second half comeback win. And he's a guy that can score from all 3 levels. He's got good length at 6'5". He can get to the rim. He offers you a lot of value on the defensive end. He's got good lateral quickness. Obviously, as I stated, he's got good length. That helps you on that end of the floor as well. And Malachi's a guy who just plays with a really high IQ. He doesn't take a lot of bad shots. He gets his teammates involved. He just takes what the defense gives him. And I think he's a guy who next year can make an impact right away, even if it's not in the starting lineup. I think he's a guy who could be the first or second guy off the bench and could really make an impact. Just given he just knows how to play the game. He makes the right plays, as I said, and he's a guy who I really think could give them a positive impact early on.
And there you have it. So, the Buckeyes should be excited about that. I mean, so much stuff going on. And as we're recording this, it's a little bit before 4 o'clock. I'm going to throw one last curveball at you. News came out today. Unless it's the most, long game troll job, April Fool's Day joke out there, Roy Williams retiring at UNC. Kind of a big deal.
Yeah, obviously, that's wild. One of the most legendary coaches in the history of college basketball. That's someone who, you always wonder when guys like Roy Williams and Coach K are going to retire because, you just hear the news and you just say, whoa. And obviously, North Carolina hasn't. They've been on a bit of a downswing the last couple of years. I think that's a program that you really can bring back up. It's a great job to have. I'm excited to see who they interview. I think they'll only go after, NBA guys or stuff like that. But, I think like Nate Oates at Alabama, he used to be at Toledo. I think he'd be a really good guy to go after. And then, obviously someone who I would just love to see is Jeff Bowles. He had a great season at Ohio, but, it's just crazy. You lose a coach like that. It'll just be so weird next season, watching the North Carolina game on TV and not seeing Roy strolling the sidelines, seeing somebody else out there.
Exactly. And, it's you sit there and you look at programs like UNC and some of the other ones out there, and it's difficult to see them going with maybe, the flavor of the week type of situation. I mean, everybody wants to attach, Porter Moser to certain jobs. I mean, I heard his name attached potentially to the Oklahoma gig. There's some other ones out there. I even read on one report out there of names that Carolina should talk to or whatever, and Chris Holtman's name was on that list. And, it's kind of funny because we're not that far removed from a certain segment of Ohio State's fan base ready to help them pack because, they only kind of come around during the tournament, didn't watch the whole season and, saw number 15 beat a number 2, and that was it. That was all they needed to see. He wasn't the right guy.
Yeah, I think that's something kind of wild. Holman hasn't really had any bad seasons at Ohio State. He's continued to get better every year. He's doing a great job recruiting. He's keeping a lot of the top talent in Ohio coming to Ohio State, which is something that's big because there's always great basketball in Ohio. And obviously, you saw a school like Indiana obviously tried to go after him. And I think it shows a lot. He didn't really even seem interested there. I think he really wants to build something at Ohio State, and I think the fans just continue to trust him. I think he's a really good coach. He's always had a successful resume. Ever since he was at Butler. So I think if Ohio State fans just continue to trust the process with him, I think Buckeyes basketball is going to continue to stay on the rise.
And there you have it. So we're at about the 28-minute mark, so we're going to call it a show so I can get this podcast up, and it being Major League Baseball opening day. I want to turn on the Dodger game, but I'll throw one last question that's not basketball at you. Who do you have in the series, and who do you have winning it?
That's tough. That's tough. I'd have to go. Personally, I don't even know from LA, but I do think the Dodgers are going to win it all this year.
Yeah, I like the sound of that. I know I threw.
I'm a Reds fan, so.
So you're mad at me about Bauer, I'm sure. I'm sure you're mad at me about that. I mean, and we didn't discuss this in our pre-interview before we decided to do the show, but I'm going to say Dodgers over Yankees in 6 is what I will have. Let's go back to the late 70s and have a little fun with that. But I think it's going to be a tremendous season. Can't wait for that. Can't wait for things to open up a little bit more and be able to go out and see a ball game in person. A couple overpriced dogs, certainly a couple of overpriced beers. The full treatment, the nice, $150 day by the time you throw the ticket in there.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited. Spring's coming around. It's not very nice out today, but nice weather, and then basketball season's wrapping up, and then there's all sorts of stuff going on right now. I mean, in my school, Otterbein, they're playing spring football because they didn't play in the fall. So yeah, but I'm excited. Good to be on today. Glad to be back, and enjoyed talking.
Absolutely. So there we go. I want to thank Jake for being part of the show, and I want to thank you for being part of the show as well and listening. One of these days we're going to get this back on a regular schedule. I promise. We've got some spring practice coverage coming up on Friday. We're going to be allowed to see at least some stretching as well as Monday. I'd look for us to be back on first part of next week after myself and Griffin Strom get a chance to see what's going on there. And then, of course, we certainly will welcome Jake back as soon as we know a little bit more about what the Buckeyes are going to do with that scholarship. But for now, we're going to call it a show. I want to thank you again for being part of it, and we will talk to you again here very soon.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game, exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to click on that subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing, and come visit us over at BuckeyeGrove.com for all the best Ohio State information on the web.